Hey bass anglers, today we're going to talk about 3 ways to get movement out of your jig head and jig head minnow, and maybe there's one in there that you haven't heard of yet. So the jig head minnow is very popular, and getting movement out of it is key, because if you just take a jig and hook it up to a minnow bait and throw it out there into schooling fish and think you're just going to swim it back to the boat and the fish are going to bite it, that doesn't always happen. And if you watched last spring, as some of the pros had a ton of success on TV, and as you'll see this spring, as you watch it happen all over again, you see them fishing those things very aggressively. And they were trying to get that roll action out of the bait. And that roll action is critical to get fish to bite it. I've swam a bait not completely understanding this through schools of fish before and tracked them down even on forward-facing sonar where they're following it and they won't commit because it's not moving naturally. So the way they were fishing it was key, but also there was a couple of components about the bait itself and about the jig itself and about the knot you tie that are important to getting the right movement out of the bait. So the first tip is to position the jig correctly in the soft plastic bait. Here I've got a Z-Man scented jerk shad, which is a great bait for this. And I'm just going to show you it first using a Smeltonator jig. And the Smeltonator jig is probably best for just moping, which is just holding the bait down there still above the fish, because it's got the horizontal, or the horizontal line tie rather than off the nose of the bait. It's on the top of the bait, allowing it to just hang in the water horizontally. So it's a good moping bait. But for this, you can use it also for the hover strolling technique that this is, but position. So the trick is you want to put this hook, and you want the shank of the hook to be in as little of this plastic as right up at the top as possible. So when I put this thing in, I'm going to put it in really close to the top. I'm going to make sure it's straight, but I'm not putting much of this into the bait. And when you're using a Z-Man bait, you've actually got to hang on to the hook now and really pull up on it and snap that into place for that to get in there. But you can see I've got that straight, it's lined up well, but it's in the very top of the bait. You see how that is, how a lot of the hook is coming out of the top of the bait, and that's crucial to get this thing to fall over. So that's the idea of it. You want the hook high so that when you're jigging the bait, and you're kind of twitching it and jigging it, you can get this thing to roll back and forth in the water. And that rolling action is what really kicks this tail loose. Otherwise, if you were to just center this thing up, throw it out and reel it in, it just comes in straight. And yeah, you can jig it and it'll bounce up and down, but with the high center of gravity pulling the hook way up in the bait, you can actually get this thing to roll. All right, and the other thing you can do to enhance that is by tying a loop knot on this sort of a vertical line tie. And by vertical, I mean, in this case, is that it's straight at you, right? It's the hook eye is pointing towards you. Tying a loop knot helps get that more action yet to really get that thing to roll. So that's positioning of the hook in the jig in the soft plastic is key number 1 to getting that thing to roll as good as it can roll. The second thing is the design of the lure itself. And one of the most popular ones out there, and can be hard to get at times, is the Deps Sakamata shad is a popular one, and that's popular because of the design of the soft plastic itself. It's different than the scented jerk shad that I had, or even another custom minnow I have, in that it's got special wings on it. And I'm going to see if I can get those. You can see the shape of the wings. They're kind of in that location on the front. There are a couple of scooped looking wings, and they hang off the side of the bait, and they really give it its hydrodynamic motion. So you can just take a regular jig, like I've got just a ball head jig here from Reaction Tackle, and if I do the same thing, I can position this thing. In fact, you can even center this one up more in the center of it. Get it in there real straight, of course, always important. Get it up to the top. So now this jig will roll, actually do a lot of roll action from the hydrodynamics of those wings. So as I'm moving that bait and as this is moving through the water, it's rolling back and forth from the specialty design of the wings on the bait itself. So that's something I didn't previously know. I knew there was popularity with Deps, but that's the reason why. They are a good bait, and it's something you should have in there if you want more movement out of your bait. The third way that you can get movement out of this is by the design of the jig, and I've got some on order, but I wanted to share them with you because this might be the one that most people didn't know about. But the center of gravity of the jig itself can be crucial to using any minnow bait that you have to get that rolling motion on it. And the first one I want to talk about is the Owner Range Roller jig head. It's a popular one, and you can see by the design of this jig head that the center of mass and the center of gravity is very high on the actual jig itself. There's a lot of lead up around the eye and up on top of that jig, whereas on a normal jig head it's more centered in the middle of the hook shank itself. They center the lead or they center the tungsten onto the jig itself, and in the range roller they put it very high, and what that does again is it allows that bait when you're moving it to tip over. The center of gravity is high and unstable, so it will roll. And that's a very popular jig head. It comes in a number of sizes, but that's one you have to have, the Owner Range Roller. Then the third one is also related to the jig head, but it's to get around the loop knot, and it's one that maybe you haven't heard of either. But this is the Ryugi Vespa Finesse jig head, and this particular jig head has a horizontal line tie on it, and what that does is it is the tying of the knot. You don't need the loop knot, where on a vertical jig tie you need to have that loop knot on it to allow the movement of the jig to be free. On this one, the position of the knot on the horizontal jig tie is consistent and allows you to get movement, the proper movement out of the jig, and it allows you to get the movement out of the orientation of the tie itself. And you can see this finesse jig head from Ryugi actually has a couple of nice keepers on it, and it's a tungsten jig. It's high quality, comes in a range of sizes. I've got a size chart on here to break down for you in terms of grams, and right on the packaging too they'll have hook sizes and weights in English along with the grams. But it's a Japanese bait, and they've mastered some of these finesse techniques. So if you don't want to master tying the loop knot on a standard ball jig, then go ahead and get that Vespa jig, and then you can just tie your old regular knot on there, whether you're don't have to learn a special knot to get that to perform right. So 3 ways to get movement out of it. It's a popular technique, but there's those little subtle nuances that sometimes really are the difference between catching fish and not. You can be staring at a school of them on forward-facing sonar and getting them to follow your jig and your lure, but getting them to commit really requires you to get that natural roll, and that's really mimicking the natural movement of a minnow in the water. Some have perfected it, and if you have these things working in your favor, you have a better chance of getting that natural movement and getting bit more. So, hope these tips were helpful. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time on the water.